This guy is a blur on tape. He zigs and zags.
He's a complete freak of nature, maybe one of the biggest freaks that we've seen.
Hello and welcome into the 24/7 Sports Football Recruiting Podcast. I'm National Recruiting Analyst Cooper Petagna alongside 24/7 Sports Director of Scouting Andrew Ivins. We had a great show for you today. Auburn on a roll. We got the Olympics going on. There's a lot going on. Drew, I got to ask, your mental health here, man. As a friend, I always got to ask. 2026 Top 247 update coming tomorrow. How you feeling about it, buddy?
Coop, I'm doing good, man. I started a new workout plan 2 days in, so I am clear-minded. I'm embracing this, and I can't wait for the start of spring or preseason practices around the country. A lot of teams kicking off. Hey, Coop, I was having a conversation yesterday with a DPP at the FBS level, and NCAA has decided 105 scholarships now, right? So we're going from the 85 to 105. And this DPP pointed out, right, lots of commitments over the weekend. Some new offers went out in the 2025 cycle. They said they think some of these schools, now that they realize, okay, we're going to have the 30 extra roster spots, they're taking some plan B guys, knowing that if it doesn't work out, you can kind of flush them out. I wanted to pick your brain on that. What do you think about that?
I think it's interesting. You and I talked about it a little bit. I think my first thought was, who's this going to impact the most? To me, it kind of felt like the group of five. Those are going to be the guys ultimately at the end of the day that are going to be affected in the short term. But I think, honestly, over time, it kind of works itself out. I think a lot of these guys aren't going to see the playing field. They'll trickle down. Then the group of five programs are going to be able to get their hands on some talent that maybe they wouldn't get on the front end. I think we'll see more cases of maybe a player like Antoine Hill, a top 247 quarterback, saying, you know what, I'm not going to wait. I'm just going to go to this group of five program. And maybe it works out. Maybe it works out from an NIL alignment standpoint that I can stay, develop 3 to 4 years, or maybe I go there, I play early, and I got 2 years, and I can look around a little bit. I haven't really thought about it. The other thing that I would kind of throw back on you, like, where do you take the surplus of the position group, right? Is it offensive line? Is it corners? Like, those were always the positions where if we could have one or two more guys, inside linebacker, ironically enough, was always a position that you'd want for depth and team's ability as well. So, I don't know. I look at those couple of positions, and I kind of look at these programs that now look at their roster, and they had 85 scholarships. I think throughout the year, we did a study at Washington. It's about 57 active players that you use throughout the season. It's more kind of similar to the NFL active roster at 53. So the hard part about this is, like, what happens to those walk-ons, right? That's so much of the game and, like, the amateurism of the game, but these guys are the heart and soul, and a lot of these guys, in-state prospects, or come from a 300-mile radius. You kind of wonder, like, all right, is all 105 players going to be, like, scholarship-worthy players? You need somebody to play on that scout team. I think there's going to be massive amounts of turnover. I think we'll see a higher volume in the transfer portal than we've ever seen before. A lot of different ripple effects that, you could go a lot of different ways with.
Yeah, and I got to throw up a tag flag on myself. I said 30 extra spots. It's actually 20 scholarship spots. I can't do some simple math here. No, Coop, I think, hey, look, if I was running a department and you've ran a department, what I would do is embrace those new 20 spots like a practice squad in the NFL. And I would prioritize defensive linemen that we always talk about you're trying to find in the transfer portal. I'd put some height, weight, speed corners. Hey, maybe it's a guy that played receiver in high school, local kid. We like him. Hey, come, redshirt for a year and be on the scout team. I think those two positions, I want to know what's going to happen with the quarterbacks. Like, who is going to roster 6, 7, 8 arms? Is anyone going to attempt to do that, or are schools just going to stick with, 3 or 4 in that room?
Financial piece going to be interesting as well. You and I were talking about it yesterday. Like, if you've been watching the New York Giants Hard Knocks offseason with Joe Shane and everything that they went through with Saquon Barkley this offseason, it just kind of brought front of mind, like, what college teams are going to have to deal with on the collegiate side when they have their revenue share, $20 million. You wrote that article of Ohio State had $20 million in terms of their NIL fund and how they could spend their money. It's going to be interesting. What do you do on the back end of the roster? Everybody talks about the top end, but how do you keep those guys content, happy on the back end? So great question. We'll see how that works out. The 105 right around the corner. But, Drew, the Olympics, all right, they've taken center stage right now in Paris, France. And another idea you brought up, which I loved, and this kind of goes hand in hand with the Freaks list a little bit that you put together every year. We wanted to take a look at some players, whether they're recruits or active in college football, I think over the last 2 to 3 years, that could potentially have participated in the Olympics. Obviously, outside of football, football is not an Olympic sport, I believe. I think I'm right there. Flag football coming to the Olympics, 2028, Drew, I believe, right? Along with lacrosse.
Yeah, LA, man. Hey, sign me up. If they need a flag football correspondent in LA, I am your guy. Tons of experience on the 7-on-7 circuit. Get me on the sidelines there.
I could totally see you doing that. All right, now here's the one catch. You came up with, I think, 4 or 5 guys that you thought could be in the Olympics, different sports. The only thing here, you can't choose Nicholas Harbor. And if you know anything about Nicholas Harbor, which I think a lot of you now do if you've been playing the NCAA college football game, Nicholas Harbor is a complete freak. Somebody at 6'4", 225 pounds that we thought had a pretty good chance of qualifying in the 100 and 200 meter, I believe, of the Paris Olympics. That didn't end up happening. But, Drew, we can't talk Nick Harbor, so he's off the table. But another familiar name at the top of college football, how about Nico Iamaleava from Tennessee? Tell us a little bit about his background in volleyball.
Yeah, Coop. I mean, Nico Iamaleava, you can kind of put him in that same boat as Nicholas Harbor, right? Like, these are the guys that I think when we get to October, the casual fan is going to know who this individual is. He's a freak athlete, and he was a volleyball player. You go back and you kind of read. There was a time when some schools, and not every college offers men's volleyball, but they thought Nico could, play both sports at the next level. Like, there was a time when he was tracking as a volleyball recruit. His brother plays in college at Long Beach State. Nico, the COVID-19 pandemic that kind of derailed his volleyball season. But Coop, I totally forgot about this. Remember, he skipped the Elite 11 finals, and the reason is because he wanted to win a club volleyball tournament in advance of his senior season. You see it right there. He's listed at 6'6". This guy can get up. Final high school game, 27 kills, 6 blocks, 9 digs, 2 aces. My wife played college volleyball. She'll probably tell me that, Nico didn't have a chance of making the Olympic roster. But let's not take away from the fact that this guy can float and he can smash the ball over the net.
I don't think it's too far out of the question. The other thing, in the Olympics, if you've been following, how about the story Chase Budinger? You remember him? Played 7 seasons in the NBA. Guy averaged 7 points. He had a knee injury. He's on the Olympic squad for the United States right now. He got his first win over France yesterday. So you talk about these guys, obviously with the background, whether it's basketball, football, whatever. Nico, I kind of rolled my eyes at that, Drew. Then I woke up this morning and started getting into the rundown a little bit. I was drinking my coffee. Dude looks legit. I couldn't tell you what the stats are or what they really mean. But in terms of an athlete, how dynamic he is, it's got to get you fired up. All right, a couple more, Drew, that we'll hit on. Carson Gordon, Jelani Watkins at LSU. Carson Gordon, the triple jump. Jelani Watkins in the 100-meter. We'll talk about him in a second. Notre Dame receiver Jordan Faison. Lacrosse coming to the Olympic Games in 2028. Dude, these are 3 guys. You go through each of them that would legit have a chance to be in the Olympics.
Yeah, Carson Gordon, he had an Olympic qualifying time, or jump, I should say, 53 feet. 2022, 2023 Gatorade Texas Boys Track and Field Player of the Year. Won a national championship in the triple jump at Nike Outdoor Nationals as an 11th grader. He's going to represent the USA at the U20 World Athletic Championships in Peru later this month, which really kind of has my mind in a pretzel because he's also doing track and field at UCLA. They take him as a quarterback. This is a guy that some schools were trying to talk into a wide receiver. Others thought potentially running back. He reminds me of Thomas Castellanos, who's at Boston College. You want to talk about a fun player to play with in EA Sports 2025 college football. That's Castellanos because he is fast. He's elusive. Carson Gordon, it's the same thing. I haven't got into the roster with UCLA, but I'm excited to see where they kind of utilize him. And I think this guy legitimately, you want to, out of every name on the list, someone that has a chance to make it in 2028 and represent the red, white, and blue in LA, I think it's Carson Gordon. And that's because, again, he is on pace. I believe Texas state record in that triple jump at 53.15.
Went into this exercise thinking all right, this would be fun. Maybe there's some guys out there that you could maybe box in as guys that, could qualify for the Olympics, or maybe they're in that competition. It's a very difficult thing to do. I mean, we're talking about the best athletes in the world here, especially in the United States. Carson Gordon, Drew, as you mentioned, that meets the Olympic qualifying standard, that 53 feet that you talked about, which is pretty amazing. The other guy here, how about Jelani Watkins, going to LSU, the receiver, the 2024 signee? He ran a 10.19, the personal record. I went back, I watched that video of him doing that this morning, and this was a guy who ran it when legal. The other guy in there was Caden Durham that he beat, that came in second. Here's the video right here. Caden Durham ran 10.28. And look at this, the separation here of the second place guy. Runner-up ran 10.28, 10.19. There's the separation. Drew, he will obviously be taking his talents to Baton Rouge, not only to participate in football, but track and field as well, and for good reason. You understand that. But this dude, different type of respect. Obviously, when you hear 10.19, you know it's blazing, but then when you see the tape, the football speed, and then the track speed as well, it's pretty unique.
Yeah, he's at the second best time this past track season in the United States for a high schooler in the 100-meter dash. The guy that ahead of him, Christian Miller, who, if you watched the USA trials, he made the final in the 100. I mean, he's a kid I think that's already sponsored by New Balance. Jelani Watkins also going to run at LSU, going to be a dual sport athlete. To me, Coop, I just thought, this just came to my mind. Man, they're pairing him with Derek Meadows. You want to talk about two complete opposites, but they share the same thing. They're both very, very athletic. Obviously, Cortez Hankton, we had on the podcast a while back. He is creating a quite the cachet of weapons there with Meadows and Jelani Watkins, and then you could throw Caden Durham in there as well. Coop, the last two I had on the list, you touched on one of them, Jordan Faison, who's at Notre Dame, right? He was a lacrosse recruit, was going to try to walk onto the football team, ended up playing a key role for the Irish. It was the MVP of the Sun Bowl. He was a top 50 recruit in lacrosse, and much like with flag football in the 2028 games, lacrosse is going to be a thing. And then Jordan Faison, he ends up starting this season for the Irish's lacrosse program as a true freshman. They won a national title. So this is a real dude. There's a few other lacrosse players out there that have made the transition to football. Faison's the one I wanted to highlight there. And then finally, Jackson Cantwell, the 2026 recruit. You mentioned our 2026 update that's coming up. I take it back. Carson Gordon might not be the lock for the 2028 games. It might be Jackson Cantwell. He has monster throwing metrics. I have never seen a 74-foot shot put, 205.4 in the discus. That shot put ranks number 2 nationally for high schoolers. Remember, he's only a 10th grader, and he's got Olympics in his blood. His dad took a silver medal at the 2028 games in Beijing. Mom competed at the 2000 games in Sydney, Australia. Cantwell, one of our favorite prospects in 2026, the best of the best around the country, want him, and it's easy to see why. I mean, that throwing metrics constantly shows up on his tape.
I watched a interview with Cantwell. I think it was a local news station out of Oklahoma. He was there for regionals, and they're interviewing this other senior that's in the same competition. And he's like, I've been working my entire life to get to this point. And then this guy shows up as a true sophomore, and you just come to the conclusion that there is no chance to win. Jackson Cantwell, pretty interesting guy. You mentioned the two parents with Olympic backgrounds as well. He talked about it. He was like, yeah, I feel like I could go have a career in this and participate in the Olympics one day. But this guy, in terms of what he can be on the football field, is pretty unique as well. Drew, the other thing is when you watch the shot, it's such a good indicator of not just power, but speed, quickness. And they say this in their interview, but you get to see the flexibility of a guy like Cantwell as well. It's pretty fascinating to kind of see what he's about, taking those talents from the shot put and the track and field events on the way to the football field. That's why people study this, right? The shot, the disc. That's why we study that and examine it so closely, especially when you're looking at point of attack players and you're looking at one of the best players in the country in 2026. God-given, I mean, everything from genetics to the size to the height to the weight to the speed. Jackson Cantwell has it all. How about this, Drew? Did you know this? Nixa, Missouri, hometown of guess who? Jason Bourne, fictional character, by the way, but I learned that in the interview at the local news as well, so I had to throw that in there. Drew, a couple other guys, Ian Reed, and then talk to me about like this legend of a wrestler in Iowa City, out of Iowa City, just hometown hero. Guy's already 3-1. I think he was like 111-1 or undefeated, three-time state champion in the state of Iowa. The Hawkeyes, obviously getting it done. I don't know what they put in the water in their home state, but Ben Cutter, is that right? Did I get it right?
Yeah, Ben Cutter. I mean, he was on the Freaks list 2 years ago. What's interesting about him is he was a member of the football team that freshman first year on campus. Just announced that he's going to take the 2024-2025 fall semester off when it comes to football. Iowa returns a ton on defense, and he too is going to be at the U20 national games. He just won a title in the United States. You said it. He went 3-1 his freshman season. The only loss came to the eventual national champion. And will he play football? I hope so, because we got Ben at the Under Armour All-America game before he, made his way to college. There were some flashes there. A guy we've always liked, and you just think about Iowa, right? It takes a while for these guys to get on the field, but man, they squeeze the most out of them. Ben Cutter certainly one to know. And then Ian Reed, Coop, rugby player. He was actually part of a U.S. Development program. His dad played in the 99 Rugby World Cup. Mom was also a rugby player. He played 9 years of rugby, Ian Reed. He's there for the Clemson Tigers. And, I don't know if you've been watching the rugby the past few weeks. It's been a lot of fun. And you think about Ian Reed, man, over 300 pounds. He's a guy you do not want to try to take down in space. And I think what he's able to do in that sport certainly translates to, at the point of attack, in the trenches. He's a guy that's light on his feet. He can move and climb to the next level. So that's a unique one. We don't get a ton of rugby players, but certainly when you see that multi-sport tag on the next gen profile, it kind of raises an eyebrow.
Latu, one of those guys as well. I think we talked about it on the show before. Latu, obviously the first round pick out of UCLA, started his career at Washington. We recruited him, obviously signed at UW, was a guy that thought for quite some time would have a career outside of football in rugby. He gave that a lot of consideration. We thought he was going to end up at Cal. We couldn't believe it. Did the right thing, obviously goes to UW, UCLA, first-round pick of the Indianapolis Colts. So there you have it, the college football studs and even some recruits. 2026, Jackson Cantwell, a name to know that could potentially one day be on your radar for the 2028 Olympics just 4 years from now. Guys, just a reminder, you are locked in to the 24/7 Sports Football Recruiting Podcast with Cooper Petagna and Andrew Ivins. You can find us every Tuesday and Wednesday on the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel at noon Eastern Time. And if you're watching right now, please make sure to like and subscribe. Drew, you talked about it, talking about those rosters going from 85 to 105 and what that means. And a little bit busier than I think it typically is this time of year. We got the dead period coming up here in August. We're going to have a ton of people flowing to Nashville. You yourself next weekend as the Player Personnel Symposium, always a great event, will take place right here in downtown Nashville. That being said, the transaction wire continues to kind of flow, and a lot of schools getting it in before fall camp starts. You got to start with Auburn because this was a team kind of hanging around the top 10. Now you look up, Drew, after this weekend, the number 5 ranked team in the country per 24/7 Sports. Where do you want to start, man? I mean, you can start in 2025. They're number 1 in 2026. Anquan Fegans last night, top 100 player. They add him. They flip Derek Smith from Alabama. Antonio Coleman flips back from Alabama to Auburn. Is committed to both programs twice. An odd one there. We'll talk about that. They get a commitment from Blake Woodby. And then in 2026, you got guys like Hezekiah Harris, Shadarius Tootle, JaMichael Garrett, all 3 in the top 247. Now 11 players in the top 247, 7 of them from the state of Alabama. This was kind of the same recipe of what they did last year. A lot of people looking at Alabama and Kalen DeBoer for good reason, what they've done in the recruiting trail. But, Drew, the last 2 years, Auburn just seems like a program that is putting it together, and it might not be this year on the field, but if you were to look at, like, the next 2 years outside of the year 2024, let's call it 25 and 26, I think Auburn's position is one of the best programs in the country. You look at Walker White, we'll see what they do this year. Still in it, still flirting with guys like Deuce Knight out there at the quarterback position, committed to Notre Dame. But, Drew, A to Z in their commit list, they're pretty darn good, and they were pretty darn good last year. I can talk about it all day. I love what they've done on the defensive line. I love what they've done in the secondary, not to mention probably the most explosive dynamic receiver core in the country last cycle as well.
So, Coop, I think, if we went back to the winter months after we saw Cam Coleman, after we saw Walker White, and then we saw some of Hugh Freeze's first recruiting class, what they were able to do as true freshmen. Like me and you were trying to buy stock in Auburn. Now, right now, maybe the price isn't as good as it would have been, but give me all the stock in the Tigers. Like this fan base, the support they have with that new facility kind of felt like a sleeping giant. They just needed to get it going. And to me, Big Cat Weekend has been part of Auburn football for a very long time. I think you can make the case this might be the best Big Cat Weekend ever, or since the early editions of it. I mean, everyone around the country seemed to hold an event this past weekend, and Auburn's the one that hit the grand slam, hit it out of the park. You mentioned all those guys. It's a big defensive focus. We can get into the Antonio Coleman flip situation. I mean, man, he better pan out at that point. You've kind of dragged a bunch of fan bases through it, but to me, two big takeaways. They continued to stockpile talent on defense. Blake would be the corner out of the DMV. I've said this in the past. I think he's one of the top slot players there. They keep kind of grabbing some undersized corners, but man, all these guys can cover. They're sticky in coverage. Anquan Fagans, he's a big frame back seven defender, one of the top players in the Yellowhammer State. To me, that is a statement from Hugh Freeze and the staff. And then you mentioned those three guys, right, in 2026. I mean, it's still very early in the cycle, but at this point, right, heading into the junior seasons, Hezekiah Harris, Shadarius Tootle, and JaMichael Garrett. I mean, those are three of the top players in state. And, would they all be committed to Auburn if Nick Saban was still running the show there in Tuscaloosa? I don't know. But this seems like opportunistic recruiting. They got a ton of momentum heading into the season. They win some games. I think the runway is there for this to continue.
What stands out to me, Drew, and I mentioned it when we brought up Auburn, is the defensive line, right? They go out, they get guys like Keldrick Falk last year. They did a good job there. Guys that are multi-positional, can play on the edge. You can move inside, and we saw that from Keldrick Falk. But this defensive line, Malik Autry, we've talked about a lot, the five-star from Alabama and from Opelika. Everybody's after this kid, Ohio State included. You go down the list. Obviously, I still think he's kind of entertaining some potential suitors. But if Auburn can hold on to him, he's really kind of like the crown jewel of this class because there's not a lot of body types like him. You go down the board, Drew, and just ironically enough, Jordan Crawford, Antonio Coleman, you got guys ranked at number 93, number 100, number 13, number 14 defensive line. There are not a lot of big bodies, guys that can play true nose, one technique, three technique. Now you have three multi-dimensional guys, and you can really build and complement a guy like Malik Autry on the defensive line. The other thing about this is if Crawford and Coleman are not going to Alabama or they're not going to Georgia, that's a win, right? You're keeping them away from your opposition as well, where this is kind of a premium commodity. I talk about that all the time. These are really difficult body types to find, even in the Southeast where people kind of think they come in droves. That's not the case this year in the 2025 cycle. Drew, the other thing that we talked about, financially, these guys cost money. So it's a lot better to do business with these guys on the front end than it is 2 years down the line where we saw LSU, Oklahoma, lock horns for a guy like Dominic Williams. You can get priced out very easily. The other thing that you brought up that I love would be Devin Williams, who we see as a nickel, Donovan Starr, who can play on the corner, one of the most high upside developmental prospects at the cornerback position. Dante Core, Eric Winters is a guy that kind of fits perfectly into that nickel role. Anquan Fagans, I think is good enough to play corner, but is ultimately at the end of the day going to be a guy that naturally transitions to safety. You and I have talked a lot about Ohio State, a lot about Oregon. I don't think Auburn is too far off in terms of the best secondaries this cycle. That is saying a lot, Drew. Like, I feel very confident in terms of the product that Hugh Freeze can put on the field offensively. How about defensively? Like, if they can continue to do this, that completely changes the trajectory of this program.
Well, Coop, I just pulled it up because I wanted to look. All right, those four corners you all mentioned are listed under 6 feet, and they're all under 6 feet. And then you go back to what they signed last cycle. Amon Lane, he was under 6 feet. Kinsley Flotson, he was under 6 feet. Jay Crawford was over 6 feet. I mean, They're smaller corners. I think that's what it is. But hey, if you are going to load up on the defensive line and get after the quarterback and apply pressure, then you can have the undersized guys that cover. I fully expect Auburn's defense to be extremely aggressive in the coming years because that's what the personnel they're bringing in looks like. That's what it seems to be what they're gearing towards. And much like in the NFL, Coop. I mean, how important have these inside corners gotten on Sundays? A lot of teams are playing nickels and slots in their base defenses. I mean, Auburn is going to have a number of them, guys that can run with those fast wide receivers in the SEC. Hey, the other thing I want to say on Auburn, you brought up Keldrick Falk, and remember we did that segment about breakout stars in year 2. I wish I'd mentioned Keldrick Falk, former top 100 recruit. Coop, I didn't realize they brought him to SEC Media Days. I'm buying stock in Keldrick Falk.
Saying a lot as a true freshman, right? And it just kind of goes to show how much they're invested. Year two. True sophomore. Not a redshirt freshman, true sophomore, Petagna flag there. But Keldrick Falk, obviously a guy that they expect a lot of on the field. It says a lot what they see from him off the field as well. So Auburn, a team that we're buying stock in. How about another team? Very, very sneaky. You look up after the weekend, all of a sudden it's like Tennessee. They're ranked number 6 in the rankings right now. Well, they flipped Deshaun Brame, one of the best tight ends in the country, top 5 player at his position from Oregon. They also beat out plenty for Laganza Hayward, top 247 safety, top 100 player. Drew, I was going back. I was kind of reading the reports this morning. 2 guys that you are really, really high on here.
I mean, we mentioned Hayward last week, kind of the icing on the cake for that defensive class. Deshaun Brame, I think he fits what Josh Heupel likes to do on offense with those tight ends. A guy you can kind of leak out of the backfield, might not be the most polished blocker at this stage, but as a receiving threat, he certainly can stretch the field. And yeah, I mean, we're seeing the clips here of Hayward, Hudson Standish on the scouting team. We came across this guy back in November. I think his only offer was like from the Charlotte 49ers. And we're like, I don't care what he is just a freak. Get him on the team. And, he could potentially be a weak side linebacker there in Knoxville, but he can play. And that is the type of individual Tennessee needs to get out of the Peach State.
All right, 5 out of the top 6 teams in the country there all hail from one conference. That is the SEC. No surprise. 2 through 6, Ohio State still holding on to that top spot. In some separation from Alabama there, but SEC making their move. You talk about parity in that conference, it's definitely coming. All right, Drew, as we wrap up here, how about Oregon? One of those teams that we talked about, hey, could they potentially make a move for the number 1 spot? Could they finish in the top 5? Well, they've taken it on the chin a little bit. We talked about Deshaun Brame, one of those guys flipping. Oregon now sitting at number 11, but they're coming off a loaded SNL camp, their Saturday Night Live camp, where they do a heck of a job getting some of the top-tier talent. They bring in 5-star DeCorian Moore, committed to the program, Trey McNutt, Chris Henry Jr., Emmanuel Iheanacho, Jabari Brady, Kendra Harrison. The list goes on and on and on. Obviously doing a great job getting the top 2026 prospects there to Eugene. It's not an easy place to travel to, Drew. How big of a deal is this for Dan Lanning to get this type of talent to campus?
I was at breakfast with my brother on Sunday, and I was reading Brandon Huffman's eye catchers from Saturday Night Live. My brother's like, why are you reading your phone? I'm like, this visitors list is simply insane. Coop, it reminds me of when Urban Meyer first started Friday Night Lights at Florida. You do not see this anymore. I mean, DeCorian Moore, 5-star. This kid has no reason to work out. He shows up and goes through drills there in Eugene. I love DeCorian Moore even more because he did just that. Evan Stewart also was a guy who went through a few camps before his senior season when he didn't have to. You had Chris Henry there. I mean, this was a who's who. Trey McNutt worked out. But really, I think in the 2026 class, Emmanuel Iheanacho, Zion Ely, Jabari Brady, Kendra Harrison, Cody Green, Brock Harris, Jonas Williams, R.J. Sermons. These are all top 64 players for us. I think it says a lot. And Coop, I mean, you worked at Oregon. You know how difficult it is to get individuals out there. I think what Dan Lanning has created is making kids want to chuck out the Ducks. I think kids also realize that, there's some good NIL opportunities there in Eugene. But watch out for Oregon. We keep saying it. We've said it in 2024, 2025. Man, the groundwork is there for them in 2026.
Mario did a good job with this as well. Dan Lanning certainly picking up the steam there as well, creating his own momentum on the recruiting trail. Drew a couple other notable commitments from around the country as well. Malik Clark, a little bit of a shocker, top 247 receiver. A lot of people expected South Carolina. He ends up going to FSU. Xavier Griffin, one of the best linebackers, edge defenders, whatever you want to call them, commits to USC. We'll circle back on that in a second. Kevin Brown, another 2026 tackle. He's off to Penn State. Logan Anderson, guy that's just made to play for Clemson. Dabo Swinney, he's off to the Tigers. Drew, real quick, any quick thoughts on any of those guys?
Malik Clark, love the idea of him at Florida State and that Mike Norvell offense. You know, a bigger framed wide receiver, he can certainly go. That's the one that fires me up. I thought he was a Gamecock for sure. One of the few surprises we've had. You mentioned Xavier Griffin. Need to hear the take here on him to USC.
Well, the take is I called some people around Georgia and was like, do you guys want this guy? They said yes. So I think you can read between the lines there. We'll see what happens. Obviously, Justice Terry, Isaiah Gibson. We'll see. Probably off to Georgia, right? So USC, not scared of that as all. Guys, we appreciate you joining us as always. Like I said, big day tomorrow as we have the class of 2026 rankings update at noon Eastern time. It will be right here on the 24/7 Sports Football Recruiting Podcast. Remember, you can find us tomorrow on the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel. See you then.